Dragon Ball has a great amount of video games as no other on his style. The tendency and popularity of Dragon Ball games year after year on the 2000 decade is not a secret for the players, but without doubt there's a video game saga specifically that became a must-play inside the games of this famous Japanese manga and anime. On 2005, for the PlayStation 2 platform, Budokai Tenkaichi would arrive. This game's intro at first sight is a mix of numerous elements used previously, but adding the 3D render that for its time looked awesome. The soundtrack and the team fight that the main characters perform leave a great impression of what we're about to experiment, and obviously who could forget about the game of looks between Goku and Vegeta.
Raindrops are falling on my head.
Well, let's talk about the game itself. We have a menu divided in different sections: a story mode, ranking mode, tournaments, local duels, customizing feature, and a gallery. Let's see what they had to offer. A story mode that, well, they did what they could with the engine and resources they had at the moment. This was the first jump from 2D battles to 3D on Dragon Ball games since what the Budokai saga achieved. Dragon Ball Z sagas also added this progress, but that's a story for another time. Each saga chapter is divided in unlockable sections. The scenarios had little targets in order to unlock secondary parts of the story, and with secondary ones, I mean you just have to end the match with the same technique that this character used in the original material. That's it. Like for example, when we kill Raditz at the end of the first chapter. We have some animations at the beginning and ending of iconic combats where there's a little recreation of what happened in the manga. They're not the more flashy and best executed ones on this video game saga, of course, but let's say that for a story mode that was left in the background in order to focus on the new combat system they wanted to create is not bad. And as every good old Dragon Ball or Naruto game, the filler fights and missions could not be forgotten. If it wasn't enough with the sparring fight between Krillin and Yamcha, now you got the fight from Yamcha against Krillin. I hated this feature. In fact, this can be the first Tenkaichi ever. It can be one of the hit video games of 2005. It could have been the first attempt of a 3D fighting style, but that's all it is, an attempt that, as every first experimentation, had issues, a lot of issues. A great portion of the missions are poorly structured. We got missions that required us to complete them in a certain time limit, normally when this combat was highly unbalanced in the series. Vegeta against Kid Buu, Tenshin Han against Nappa, etc. These matches are pretty frustrating due to the amount of damage the enemy deals. Hey, it makes sense, right? If you're technically trying to run away from that opponent, it has to be so much stronger. But the problem is the CPU use of attacks. The AI on this game is horrible and infuriating. It always uses the same techniques and throws a shitload of ki blasts. It makes it so repetitive that it can even turn the game's experience into something far from enjoyable. Fortunately, a couple of minutes later, I realized that even though the AI is incredibly suppressive in close combat, when it comes to throwing ki blasts, it's just a target with legs. It makes it so much easier. But is that good? Should this kind of games encourage you to attack your opponent just with projectiles and kamehamehas? The hand-to-hand combos deal no damage. Consequently, when they were developing the game, the developers didn't have in mind the possible scenarios that the player would have been exposed if the game counted with an overwhelmed hand-to-hand combat. That's why this issue appeared. Throw ki blasts and special attacks until the rival is dead. The fights lacked of balance and a lot of moves were repetitive but effective, which caused these kind of things. But anyway, let's move on and forget all this bad commentary and let's take a look to the other game modes. The story mode covers the entire Dragon Ball Z events and their respective movies. We have the Saiyan Saga, Frieza Saga, Cell, Majin Buu, the appearance of Cooler, the fight against Slug, the fusion versus Janemba, everything is here. In fact, the game rewards you for completing some additional missions inside the main one and unlock more fights inside the arcs, the ones that didn't have much relevance. But unfortunately, the majority of these encounters make part of the filler we mentioned before. By finishing the main quests, you also unlock more fighters for the character's roster, and that's how we get to the ranking mode. This is an aside game mode where you choose a certain character and you go through a series of fights in order to beat 100 opponents. As you get through these battles, you take the fighter's position in the ranking. This game mode is offline only, and it is extremely difficult to complete. If this was implemented as online combat, it would have been leveraged in a better way. But obviously with the online structure of the PS2 back in the day, that was impossible. The tournament mode was technically more of the same, but you advance through squares until you reach the final, and winning the competition is not that complicated. By the way, this game added a not much used element in the past, the penalty that meant touching outside the ring ground, just as it happened in the series. On Versus mode, you could play local matches against the CPU or with your friends. The C evolution allowed you to edit and organize the objects that you recollected on story mode and improve the character's performance as you had a little gallery with all the characters' design. We covered all the present game modes in order to talk exclusively about the combat mechanics. This is a pretty different environment than the one we were used to on Budokai. Apart from the game's 2D perspective, now with the 3D changes, you had a much more larger territory to travel, and the duels were not arcade-based ones anymore, but it was becoming an arena fighter. Taking advantage of this new environment, the developers could add new moves that the 2D approach would not allow them previously. I'm talking about the rush attacks. These are special moves that activate a special animation where the character charges against the opponent and perform a series of frenetic moves to deal a lot of damage in one single combo. It was a very fun thing to perform and watch, but it arrived with its own issues and advantages. For example, these rush attacks are completely unblockable. They can only be countered with another special attack or with the same rush move, something that would tie off in a very appreciated minigame. You had to turn the analog as fast as you could to win the struggle and continue with the rush attack you threw at the beginning. This move can also track you down around the whole map. It doesn't have a time or range limit. Due to all these advantages that broke the game's balance, you could basically spam this special move and overwhelm your opponent without having to chain regular combos. Again, this is a mechanic that pushes the players to the comfortable game style and doesn't have a place for experimentation. And in fact, if you ask me, that's what makes a fighting game so much fun, testing every single one of its characters, discovering new stuff, the pros and cons of each one, learning how each fighter behaves. But that is what this Tenkaichi doesn't allow you to do. And even if it does, it didn't have something new to unveil. A lot of these rush attacks were copy-paste for the majority of characters. They didn't have a unique series of moves. We're talking about a 90 character roster that could offer a lot of possibilities, but it was not the case. The matches had this kind of charged punches of much more power that blow you so much further. This gave us a possibility to chain more combos in a wider range, or another special input that the defender can press in order to go back and counterattack. For the first time, we could fight underwater, something that was seen multiple times in the series but not used to this moment. The epic beam struggles became one of the most attractive elements on this game, a struggle that worked exactly as the struggles of rush attacks. There's no doubt they were planning to make a game with the real essence of Dragon Ball with its most successful elements. To be fair, the game has a lot of good mechanics, but the problems, at least from my point of view, opacates those moments where it shines. The soundtrack is not much more than 3 or 4 songs during battles, music that in most of the cases doesn't sync with the battle's tone. The beam struggles have a lot of nonsense. You cannot transform into Super Saiyan or any other transformation mid-battle. This is a mechanic seen on later titles, but they were leaving a lot of players with so much to wish for. Of course, I cannot ignore the fact that not everyone had the same perspective of a fighting game as I did back then, because for some reason they continued the saga. It was well received. We're talking about a retrospective review. There's a possibility that my perception for this game was different in the past, but even if I pretend to be someone who was actively playing the Budokai saga, would find the first Tenkaichi rough and not that fluid. To wrap up, this game saga started with a great impact on 3D combat for Dragon Ball games, a great and unique repertory of 3D character design, and with a reliable factor with the series that connects incredibly well with the players. Ignoring the gameplay failures, this was enough to give the Spike developers green light to develop a worthy sequel, Budokai Tenkaichi 2, the game we will be discussing in the next chapter.